1350 South Ocean Boulevard, Hobe Sound, Florida. A private, sprawling 3.4-acre waterfront estate once owned by actor Burt Reynolds. After years of decline, it was sold quietly in late 2021, nearly 3 years after his passing. Michael and Stephanie Connelly weren't celebrities. They were a couple from Charlotte, North Carolina, mid-40s, financially successful but not famous. Michael ran a chain of boutique gyms, and Stephanie, a freelance interior designer, had a love for retro Hollywood. It was Stephanie who insisted they look at the old Reynolds place. She'd seen it in a magazine as a teenager and never forgot the rustic wood beams, the personal charm, the cowboy soul of it. When they toured the house, it was tired. Weathered shutters, chipped stucco, a dusty Burt's Ranch sign still hanging in the private screening room. But Stephanie saw potential and Michael saw investment. They made an offer all cash and closed in October 2021. The property was never listed publicly. They moved in 2 months later, just before Christmas. From the first night, Stephanie said she had trouble sleeping. The house felt too warm in some rooms and freezing in others, even with the HVAC running. Doors creaked, lights flickered, but Michael chalked it up to the house being old. But within the first week, Stephanie noticed something more specific. She kept waking at 4:12 a.m. every morning, hearing the distant sound of spurs metal clinks on tile from the hallway. She thought it might be an animal, or maybe a dream, until the third night when she followed the sound into Burt Reynolds' old office, now her makeshift studio. On the desk lay a single Polaroid photo, an original, not one they'd brought of Burt sitting in that very room, smiling beside his dog, Quigley. The photo hadn't been there before. Michael didn't believe in ghosts. Not until New Year's Eve, when he stayed up late watching an old football game in the downstairs theater. At around midnight, the projector shut off on its own. Then the screen flickered and flashed a home video not from any tape he owned, showing a younger Burt in cowboy boots, rehearsing lines in front of the very same screen. He turned around, startled, but the room was empty. Michael searched the projector. No USB, no disc, nothing connected. The video never appeared again. They had moved into Burt's former master suite, massive, dark wood, a sliding door to the intracoastal view. But something was off. Stephanie said the air smelled like cheap cologne and sweat in the mornings. And once, after waking from a nap, she found deep impressions in the mattress beside her, like someone had been lying there. She asked Michael if he'd come in. He hadn't. A few days later, she found a note written in perfect cursive on a yellowing notepad on the dresser. "It's still my house. Don't make it cute." There. The Connellys tried to renovate, paint over the wood, remove the horse memorabilia, redecorate the bar that once hosted legends like Dom DeLucy and Lonnie Anderson. Every attempt failed in strange ways. Wallpaper refused to stick in Burt's bar. Paint peeled off overnight from the red leather walls of the cigar lounge. Contractors refused to return after hearing voices. One even claimed he saw a man in a red robe leaning in the doorway. Stephanie finally relented and left half the house untouched. It was Michael who eventually cracked. He'd begun to dream of Burt in full Smokey and the Bandit costume, standing at the foot of the bed, smiling silently, shaking his head. The dream repeated for 8 nights in a row. On the 9th, Michael woke with muddy boot prints on the floor by the bed. No one had come in. Alarm system was untouched. He took the hint. They put the house back on the market privately in June 2022. It never officially listed, but it sold to a developer out of Miami, who planned to tear it down. But here's the twist. 3 months after closing, the developer's construction crew was pulled from the site. No work was ever done. Neighbors say at night, you can still see lights on in the house, especially in the office, even though it's been empty for nearly 2 years. And sometimes, if you're walking along the water, near midnight, you might hear it too, that faint jingle of spurs, and a low voice muttering something that sounds like a line from Deliverance. The second week after moving in, Stephanie decided to fully immerse herself in the renovation process. She had cleared her schedule, rolled out blueprints across the kitchen island, and brought in local stagers and lighting consultants from Palm Beach. She was convinced the house just needed a little breathing room, that the strange feelings and unexplained incidents were just the result of old, dusty energy trapped in the wood. But the house had its own sense of time. No matter how early she woke, the grandfather clock in the den original, heavy walnut with a gold-plated pendulum, always showed 4:12 a.m. when she entered the room. Even after she replaced its battery. Even when the rest of the clocks ticked forward. Even when she took it down and left it in the garage for a day the next morning, it stood upright in the hallway again, ticking softly. Michael thought she was letting her imagination get ahead of her. "We're in a new place. You're tired. That's all this is," he'd repeat, rubbing her shoulders at night. But his words were starting to feel rehearsed, mechanical, like he was reading them off a script. Stephanie felt that too. One evening, Stephanie walked into the private screening room, drawn by the sound of muffled dialogue, old, grainy, familiar. The room was dim, the thick red curtains drawn over the windows, and the only light came from the flickering screen. A black-and-white western was playing. She assumed Michael had left something running. But when she got closer to the screen, she realized she was in it. Not her actual self, but someone who looked just like her, wearing a vintage nightgown, standing in the very same theater. In the film, this version of her turned to look straight at the camera. Then the screen went dark. When she screamed, the sound didn't echo in the room. It was absorbed by the thick walls like it had never happened at all. She didn't tell Michael. The property backed up to the intracoastal waterway. A long wooden dock extended out over the greenish-blue water, surrounded by mangroves and the occasional manatee. Stephanie began walking out there in the mornings, needing air, needing space from the house. But even there, she felt watched. One morning, just after sunrise, she found an old tackle box sitting at the end of the dock, rusted, covered in dust. Inside were 3 unopened packs of cigarettes, a Zippo lighter engraved with "Smoky Rides Again," and a handwritten note folded carefully beneath them. "Don't clean it up too much, sweetheart. This house don't like strangers with clean hands." No signature, but she knew. She tossed the lighter into the water and walked straight back inside. That night, the fire alarm went off in the master bedroom at exactly 4:12 a.m. Nothing was burning. Michael became distant. Not cruel. Not violent. Just different. He no longer stayed in bed past sunrise. He took long drives alone without saying where he was going. He began wearing cowboy boots, something he'd never done before, and a suede jacket he said he found in the closet. Even though Stephanie had gone through every inch of it. One night, she found him standing in the garage in the dark, staring at the Trans Am they'd bought at auction. It was a collector's piece, a nod to Smokey and the Bandit, but Michael wasn't a car guy. Not really. He turned to her slowly, almost mechanically, and said, "You ever think about how fast you gotta drive to outrun yourself?" Then walked back inside. They didn't get many visitors. The house was gated. The long driveway curved in such a way that you couldn't see the road from the front porch. But one Saturday afternoon, just before sunset, a man appeared at the gate on foot. Older, heavy-set, with silver hair and a Stetson hat. He didn't press the buzzer or try to enter. He just stood there, motionless, looking toward the house for nearly 10 minutes. Stephanie saw him from the upstairs window. She went down barefoot, wearing a robe. The air felt thick, like before a storm. She opened the front door and called out, "Can I help you?" The man raised his hand gently, like he was tipping a hat that wasn't there, then turned and walked away down the road. They never saw him again. That night, Michael had a seizure in his sleep. His body locked up tight, eyes rolled back. No history, no medication. The doctors found nothing wrong. They had agreed early on not to use Burt's old office for anything more than storage. It felt too personal, like a museum that didn't want to be disturbed. The door was always shut. But one night, just past 2 a.m., Stephanie heard the sound of a typewriter clacking. Slow, rhythmic, like someone was hunting each key with one finger. She sat up in bed and listened. Came from the direction of the office. When she went to check, the hallway light flickered, then died. She reached the door, hand trembling, and pushed it open. No one inside. No lights on. But the typewriter on the desk and old Underwood that had come with the house had a fresh sheet of paper loaded into it. One line was typed across the middle. "You're still writing the wrong story." She backed out and closed the door again. It locked itself. "Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story." The weather turned strange in late January. Florida winters were typically mild, but in Hobe Sound that month, the air became unnaturally still, as if the wind had stopped trying. The palms didn't sway. The birds that used to chatter in the mangroves behind the property fell silent. Inside the house, time warped. Stephanie would glance at the clock at noon, then look again. What felt like an hour later, it would still read 12:03. But her tea had gone cold. Her laptop battery, which had been full, would be dead. Michael's phone rang constantly, but when he answered, no one was there. Just breathing. They stopped using the landline entirely after the third time it rang in the middle of the night, and when Stephanie picked up, the voice on the other end rasped. "You're not her." Stephanie had begun avoiding the master bathroom. Not because of anything loud or violent, in fact, the opposite. It was the stillness in there. The mirrors no longer reflected her properly. Her image was always half a second behind, blinking too late, shifting slightly to the left even when she stood still. One morning, she went in to wash her face and glanced up into the wide mirror above the sinks. She froze. In the reflection, Michael stood behind her, staring at her back. But in real life, she was alone. She spun around fast, nothing. Just silence and an open doorway. But when she turned back to the mirror, the image was still there. Michael. No expression. Just watching. She didn't scream. She backed slowly out of the room and shut the door. That evening, she asked Michael where he'd been all morning. He looked at her, almost confused. "I've been in the theater. Watching Gator. You were there. Remember?" She hadn't been. There was a room upstairs they had barely used, small, oak-paneled, with faded curtains that hadn't been changed since the 80s. Stephanie used it to store fabrics and mood boards for design projects. One day she went in to look for a box of samples, and the room was completely empty. Completely. Not just her items gone, but no furniture, no curtains, no carpet. Even the walls had reverted to bare drywall, like someone had stripped it overnight. Michael swore he hadn't touched it. No staff had been in. The security system showed no alerts. But the next morning, when she checked again, everything was back right where it had been before. Except one thing. A framed photo now sat on the small side table by the window. It was a black and white image of Burt in his younger years, seated in that exact same chair, smiling. The frame looked worn, the glass cracked in one corner. Written in pen across the bottom, "Rooms already taken." By February, the mood in the house changed from uncanny to oppressive. Stephanie stopped answering calls. Michael rarely left the theater. They barely spoke at dinner. The air inside the house carried a thickness that didn't come from heat. It felt like presence. Like someone standing in every corner just beyond your line of sight. Michael started drinking in the mornings. Stephanie began keeping the windows open, even during rain, trying to air it out. Though the smell of cologne and leather only grew stronger. And then came the voices. Low murmurs at first, like TV static in another room. But at night, just as she was drifting into sleep, Stephanie began hearing monologues, dramatic, scripted, deliberate, as if someone was rehearsing a role behind the bedroom wall. She recognized the voice. Warm, rugged, aged with charm. Burt Reynolds. One night, she heard scratching at the patio door. A slow, persistent sound, claws tapping against the glass. It was just past 2 a.m. Michael was asleep or pretending to be. Stephanie pulled back the curtain cautiously. Outside stood a large golden retriever, wet from rain, tail gently wagging. No collar, just waiting. She felt no fear, only recognition. It looked like Quigley, Burt's dog, the one from the old photos in the office. But that wasn't possible. The dog had passed years ago. Stephanie opened the door a crack. The dog didn't come in. It just looked at her for a long moment, eyes dark and unreadable, then turned and walked off into the trees at the back of the property. The next morning, she found muddy paw prints across the tile in the living room, all leading to Burt's old leather recliner, which was now rocking slowly, though no windows were open. It became clear to Stephanie. The house preferred Michael. Lights stayed on for him. The thermostat worked in rooms he entered. The theater never glitched when he used it. But for her, the lights shorted out, water came out rusty, and electrical outlets buzzed with low static. Michael began talking to someone she couldn't see. He'd mutter under his breath, answer invisible questions, laugh at things no one said. Once she asked who he was talking to, and he blinked, then replied, "He thinks you're not grateful. He thinks you want to erase him." Stephanie packed a bag the next morning and drove to her sister's in Boca Raton. She needed a few days away, but by nightfall she was back. Her car had turned itself around halfway down I-95. The GPS rerouted her twice, and when she finally pulled over to check her phone, all her photos were gone, every image from the past 3 months replaced by one. A blurry, dark photo of the front of the house, taken from the water. It was dated June 1981. Stephanie returned to the house just after midnight. She didn't even remember turning the wheel to drive back, only that at some point the radio in her car started playing a song she hadn't heard in years, Eastbound and Down. It was Burt's favorite. And when she glanced at the display screen, it didn't list the track or the station, only a string of characters. _ lives here. The gate was open when she arrived. The house loomed at the end of the long driveway, lit from within, as though it had been expecting her. Every window glowed. The palm trees that usually rattled in the wind stood still and straight, like sentries. Inside, everything was warm. Too warm. The kind of heat that doesn't come from the air but from memory, from emotion, from something that used to be alive and still wants to be. The scent of old wood, whiskey, and cologne hung thick in every room, layered like smoke. Michael was sitting in Burt's old recliner in the den, the same chair that had rocked on its own a week earlier. He wasn't watching TV. He wasn't reading. He just sat there, still, hands resting on the arms of the chair, eyes open and unfocused. The light from the lamp beside him was low and amber, flickering faintly like a candle, though no flame was visible. Stephanie stepped toward him slowly. "Michael!" No answer. She moved closer, leaned in. His lips parted, and in a gravelly whisper, a voice that was not entirely his, he said, "You shouldn't have left. He doesn't like when people leave." That night the house turned. The temperature dropped sharply, like a cold front had burst in through invisible cracks. Stephanie went room to room trying to shut windows that were already closed. She turned up the heat, but the system didn't respond. Instead, the lights dimmed, one by one, until the only illumination came from the theater at the back of the house. It was on. She had never touched the projector. She walked toward the glowing room, each footstep echoing too loud on the old tile, as if the hallway itself was stretching longer with every step. Inside the theater, the screen was playing footage again, home movies, grainy and handheld. Burt Reynolds in a white tank top, barefoot, laughing, pouring bourbon into a chipped glass. Behind him, a woman's voice, soft and playful, asking questions. Then, a cut to Burt walking through the very same house, room by room, waving to the camera, showing off his trophies, his dogs, his books. He looked happy, radiant, and then the screen flickered, hard. A static pulse. The image shifted. Now the footage showed Stephanie present day walking the same rooms, reaching toward the same books, sitting in the same leather chair. But in the footage, her expression was different. She looked hollow, controlled, like someone else was wearing her face. She stumbled backward, heart racing. On the screen, her recorded self turned and looked directly at the camera, and said, "It's his house now." The following morning, the backyard was soaked. Though it hadn't rained, Stephanie went out to the dock barefoot. The air felt thicker out there, older. As she reached the final steps, she noticed something strange at the base of a palm tree. Fresh earth. A shallow hole had been dug, or uncovered. Inside, half buried, was a bundle wrapped in oilskin cloth. She pulled it free slowly. Her hands shook. The cloth fell away to reveal a revolver, a script marked with Burt's handwriting, and a pair of sunglasses she had never seen before, gold-framed, cracked on one side, still dusty with age. There was a note beneath the bundle. Legacy isn't a thing you take. It's a thing that takes you. She reburied it. With her own hands. When she stood, Michael was behind her. Barefoot. Dirty. Smiling gently. You finally found it, he said. Stephanie nodded. There were no questions left to ask. They stayed. Not because they wanted to, but because there was no real alternative. Every attempt to leave failed. The house crashed power in nearby hotels. GPS rerouted them in loops. Stephanie once passed the same gas station 4 times in different directions. The property seemed locked in time now. Birds never returned. Wind never blew. Visitors stopped coming. One night, months later, a woman from the county assessor's office drove out to confirm changes in ownership. She was never seen again. Only her car remained, parked neatly at the foot of the driveway, the engine still warm. Inside, the house hadn't changed. Michael had grown quieter, but somehow more certain. Stephanie no longer decorated. She cleaned the same rooms again and again, always finding dust she could have sworn she'd just wiped. And every morning at 4:12 a.m., the grandfather clock would chime. Once, then stop. The story ends or tries to with a VHS tape. Found in early 2024 by a film archivist from Jupiter who had purchased an estate sale box from a closed-down storage facility nearby. The box was labeled Reynolds Private in marker. Inside was one unlabeled tape. On it, a grainy home video showing the interior of the Hobe sound house sometime in the late 90s with Burt narrating as he walks room to room, talking to someone behind the camera, laughing, pointing to furniture, stopping in the hallway. Then he turns to the lens and says, out of nowhere, I'll always be here. You can sell it. You can paint it. But if you live here, I live here. He smiles. The footage cuts out. Some say the house is abandoned now. Others say the Connellys still live there, but they've changed. Neighbors claim to see movement at night. Some swear they've heard a projector running long after midnight. And if you stand at the edge of the dock just before sunrise, facing the water, sometimes you'll see him. Burt, just the silhouette, watching, smiling. Home. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.